great. I was miles into a training run, preparing for last year's Twin Cities Marathon. I don't know, 7, 8, 9 miles in. It was the best run I had had through the whole time I've been training. I was going along, my pace was fast, 8.5 minute, 8-minute 20 pace on the miles, which was really good. That was the pace I wanted to do the marathon at. My heart rate was low, it was only 150, which is really pretty low for training at that point. This was fantastic. We were weeks before the marathon, and I had nailed it. I was going to crush this marathon. I was going to hit that time I wanted. I was going to beat the time I set up for. I might qualify for Boston. This is going so well. I'm not going to Boston. It's too much work. But I could tell people I qualified for Boston. This was fantastic. I was going to brag about it when I got back to work on Monday. And then I turned around into the wind. Now a headwind that had been the tailwind helping me along. Oh. Turns out I wasn't that awesome of a runner. I was just a pretty good runner, getting some help I never noticed. And I never would have thought about, never would have noticed if I had just stopped running just a few seconds earlier. I'm not sure how I would have gotten home at that point. I was 9 or 10 miles from home, but maybe I would have called for a ride. Not the best marathon training I know, but work with me, it's an example. If I had just stopped, I could have gone on thinking that I had suddenly become an elite athlete, that it was all me. But that really great run, well, really great half a run, the trip home, nothing to write home about, it wasn't all me. So I wonder, is it ever? Is anything that I accomplish ever all me? Are any of my failures ever all me? Actually, let's dig a little deeper on this, because the more I read to prepare this sermon, the more I started to wonder if any of it is me at all. Do I get credit for anything I do? Or blame? How much of it is me, and how much of it is luck, or chance, or fate, or, for believers, divine intervention? Well, let's start by defining terms. I'm going to use the term luck this morning. And luck is a bit of a loaded word that could mean something different to everybody in the sanctuary. But as it happens, I'm the one with the microphone, so for the next 20 minutes or so, I get to say what it means. And I'm working with the definition used by philosophy professor Martha Nussbaum in her book about luck and ethics. She defines luck as what does not happen through a person's own agency, what just happens to him as opposed to what he does or makes. Now that can cover a lot of territory. It can be the random event, a strike of lightning. But it can also be something other people do beyond your control that ends up affecting your life. The example I gave earlier today is, as Amy said, I'm an actor. And when I auditioned for a show, back in the days before I had my own company and could just cast myself, I didn't know if I would get a role. Didn't matter how great an audition I gave, there were too many other things going on. It depended on what the director was looking for. If the director liked me, if I showed up in a bow tie, maybe the director hates bow ties. I don't know. It depends on who else shows up for the audition. It depends on whether enough people show up for auditions. I might get a role even if I have a horrible audition. If there's not enough people, you just don't know. So there are all of those factors that are other people making decisions outside of my control. That too, for purposes of today, is luck. It is the type of luck that E.B. White was talking about when he said, luck is not something you can mention in the presence of self-made men. It is also the luck that looms over the life of kids like Diamond Size, a high schooler in St. Paul who was the subject of a Minnesota Public Radio story, talking about how she was struggling to make it to graduation. 17-year-old girl. When an English writing assignment asked Diamond, "What would you like to know that you have never learned, or what do you want to know more about?" Diamond had an answer. She had a string of answers that she was able to draw from her life. What makes parents give up on their children? Why do I work 3 jobs at 17? Why am I homeless? Why can't I be happy and stress-free? What's the real purpose of school? Why does family hurt you the most? Sometimes I just imagine if when I was younger, if my mom did just give me away, like just give me to foster care, if my life would be different, if my personality would be different. I just think about that every day, all the time. What this 17-year-old girl is trying to wrap her head around is the luck that put her in this place at this point in her young life. Now, it's the type of luck we're all subject to long before we have any ability to exert any control over our lives, our actions, or even really our minds or our bodies. It includes luck in the crafting of our inherent traits, genes and personality, all of which comes from biology and from the caregivers who raise us, from our peers and friends, from teachers, and countless other factors that we may never recognize, may not even be able to imagine. For example, the Harvard Center for the Developing Child has studied how early experience as infants and toddlers can forecast the way we react to the world as children, as adolescents, and as adults. See, our bodies store the memory of what happens to us as infants and children, and that memory controls the choices we make as we get older. In fact, it's probably more accurate to say that it controls whether we are able to really choose our actions in certain situations at all. See, it all depends on the stress our baby bodies and brains experience and how the adults in our lives respond to it. Some stress, hunger, pain, a full diaper, that's just normal when you're a baby. It's probably even required for our development. And when adults intervene and soothe our pain or our fear, satisfy the hunger, change the diaper, our baby brains dial down from the stress, and that leaves room for the brain to grow the pathways that we use for reasoned thought eventually in our lives as we grow older. And as those pathways grow, they get used and they get firmly established in the brain. Because what happens is, as infants, our brains are constantly growing these pathways. Just you see depictions of the brain at that age. It's just these full neuron synapse pathways. And as we get older, hit early adolescence, more and more of them die off. That's just the way our brains work. And the ones that stay are the ones that have been reinforced by our experience. And so, if that experience as children, as infants, is what researchers call toxic stress, sustained, frequent, high levels of fear or anger or pain without that intervention, without buffering by caring adults, then our bodies and our brain and central nervous system learn something else. We develop and reinforce and establish pathways we need to stay on a near constant high alert, because what our body has learned, what our mind has learned, is that the world is a scary and threatening place. So as we grow up, our bodies and brains easily and quickly shift into a confrontational fight or flight or freeze mode. If we lived with that toxic stress, by the time we are 10 or 11 or 12 years old, our brains keep us at that point, on the edge, all the time. The resting heart rate for somebody like this, who has this experience, is roughly twice that of somebody who has grown up in a more loving, what we would consider a more normal environment. What it does is amazing. And so by the time we are teens, our bodies and brains dictate how we will react to any perceived threat or slight. the emotional response centers of the brain take over. The reasoning portions of the brain are literally turned off. Anybody in that state is almost completely unable to process thoughts or ideas in any coherent way. There is literally no talking to us when we are that angry or that scared. Now, this can happen and does happen to everybody. It happened to me last night. I slammed my finger in a closet door, pinched it right between. It hurt. There were words I should not say from the pulpit. But those were really the only words I was able to form at that moment. There was no talking to me. Amy tried. And for a few seconds, it was pure, blind anger and pain. Now for me, it's just a few seconds. But for a kid, for an adult who grew up in that toxic stress, that can go on and feed itself. And so they never get back to the ability to reason and talk and think about, what am I going to do to get out of this place? But we all have the emotion centers in our brains. People with the toxic stress live close to the emotional state of anger all the time. And they live on that edge in a world that likes to think it treasures thoughtful conversation and rationality. A world that tells us when we are enraged or frightened to use your words at a time when we can't. Ours is a society that at least likes the idea of what some moral philosophers call the control principle. The control principle says that we are morally accessible only to the extent that what we are assessed for depends on factors under our control. Or, translated out of philosophies, which is even harder to follow than legalese, we get credit or blame only for the things we do that are within our control. We love this idea, and I think we like it because it helps convince us that most things in our lives are in fact under our control. That our successes are the results of our brains and our talent and our hard work. That other people's misdeeds and moral shortfalls happen because those people chose not to do the right thing, or that they chose not to work hard enough. It helps convince us that we aren't them. That we couldn't be them because we control our own choices, our own actions, our own destinies, and we choose better. Yeah. Try telling that to Diamond. Diamond grew up in that high-stress situation. Diamond, at the age of 17, was struggling to focus just on the idea of graduating from high school, because in those moments when her brain lets her get to rational thought, she knows that is her path out of a very difficult life. Or at least it's the first step. That was 16 days to go. It wasn't clear that she was actually going to make it. The NPR reporter who had been telling Diamond's story tried to reach her, but it took days to hear back. And finally, the reporter got a text. "I'm not okay." The reporter wrote back, "What happened? I'm concerned." And Diamond responded with just one word: life. Now for kids like Diamond, they really have no choice but to see in that word, life, something that conveys how little control they really have over their own fates. How much the choices and actions of other people have already shaped their lives. But some people never really need to face that truth. People like me. I was born white and male in 1970. That's a time when being born white and male mattered even more than it does now. 2 points for me. I was born to middle-class parents, working lower middle class, but middle class. 1 more point. I was born to parents and into extended families who cherished children, but who also understood that children had to learn to be their own person, and who valued education. Point for me. I've lost track of how many points I scored before I even left my mother's womb. My dad got good, decent paying jobs throughout my childhood, which kept us housed and fed and clothed, and left the money to buy me and my brother Fisher-Price adventure people and Star Wars toys and books and Matchbox cars so we could spend our summer afternoons in our backyard spinning stories and developing our imaginations. There's more points for things I had no control over whatsoever. That I couldn't possibly have controlled. I was not in a position to offer my dad a job. And that's just a slice of what I got from my mom and my dad. We don't have time to catalog all of the gifts I got from them, much less the opportunities and the leg ups that I got from grandparents, aunts and uncles, friends, teachers, my wife, the occasional complete stranger. And it would be so easy for me to look at my life now. A career in law, running my own law firm, a 21-year marriage to a woman. Apparently, I make myself weird. A 21-year marriage to a woman who still quickens my heart and inspires me to be the best person I can. A home that we've owned for 17 years that remains in pretty good shape, except for the closet thing that fell that led to me bashing my finger in another closet. But other than that, good shape. A church that feeds my soul, challenges me to keep seeking answers, leisure time to indulge hobbies and interests like music and acting and video games, and standing up here in front of all of you people pretending I know something that is worth sharing. It would be easy for me to look at that and assume that I built it by virtue of hard work, talent, and my own good choices. And I tell you that it would be easy because it has been easy. I have often, subconsciously, somewhat consciously, credited myself for things that I don't get full credit for. Because I don't step back and appreciate all of the luck that went into getting me here today. I don't need to. Most of my luck has been good luck. And as the Roman philosopher Marcus Tullius Cicero observed, we forget our pleasures, we remember our sufferings. My run last summer is a good example. If I had just stopped, I never would have known how much help I got from that wind. But if that whole run had been into the headwind, I would have remembered, I would have noticed, I would have told people about it. And that's in part because that's the way our brains are designed. The brain has to process and store an immense amount of information, and to make that possible, it uses shortcuts. One of those is called hindsight bias. The idea that once a thing has happened, we tend to assume that thing was bound to occur. And we really fall into hindsight bias when it's a positive thing that we think may happen, which is called self-serving bias, which is a tendency to think our successes are due to our internal traits and talents, while our failures are caused by that other guy. Some of this comes from evolutionary biology. Negative experience is stored in the amygdala, and it is stored densely. And the reason for that is because our brains evolved to help us survive in a dangerous world. We haven't evolved that far from where we were thousands of years ago. And thousands of years ago, it was really, really important to remember that if you step on this thing and make that noise, the tiger over there is going to hear you and try to eat you. It was less important to remember that sleeping felt good. Now, does that mean we can't foster an awareness of the gifts and opportunities handed to us through no fault of our own? Thich Nhat Hanh, the Buddhist monk whose reading we heard this morning, doesn't think so. He does not believe we need to live in ignorance, or that we should. The way to understanding, to peace, he teaches, starts with awareness, what the Buddhists, or at least the Zen Buddhists, call mindfulness, of all the moments of our lives. Life, Hanh writes, is only found in the present moment. But he also writes that the present moment contains the past, so that the ghosts of the past